Okay, well, welcome everyone to our afternoon session, OpenAthens Statistics, Talkin Attributes. I'm Russell Palmer. I'm the Assistant Director for Support Services at Galileo, and with me today is Ken Henslee. He's a system analyst here at Galileo. Say that 3 times fast. And hopefully you all know us. So I see a lot of familiar names here and have worked with us on the OpenAthens implementation and follow up. If you haven't, I see a few faces from the public library and K-12 community, and we will be working with you all as soon as we can to implement OpenAthens. What we wanted to share today was a little bit about the power of OpenAthens statistical tools and share the experience of some of our colleagues in the Galileo community that have been so nice in sharing with us what they've done with OpenAthens statistics so far. We've been working on OpenAthens implementations for a while, but it is still a fairly new thing for us. Georgia Tech was the first institution to implement, and as Georgia Tech do, they went live with OpenAthens 6 or 7 or 8 months before we began our implementation here at Galileo. So they have been working with this probably for longer than anyone else, and they had some robust things to share with us that I look forward to sharing with you. But also, one of the things that we wanted to get across about OpenAthens statistics is the importance of attributes. And we'll talk about attributes, what they are, what they do, how they help with OpenAthens statistics and make them more valuable. And Ken has made a great effort this year working with the RACL Assessment Working Group to create some documentation designed to be shared with your IT department about how to introduce more attributes into the OpenAthens environment and be able to collect statistics more thoroughly there. So we'll explain all this as we go through today. And in the interest of being detailed, for those of you who have not participated in an OpenAthens implementation yet at your institution, I wanted to begin by answering the question, what is OpenAthens? And essentially, OpenAthens is hosted middleware. It essentially sits between the user and the vendor and manages the authentication transactions. And it's different for those of you who've used EasyProxy in the past, whether you've had your own instance of EasyProxy at your institution, or you've used Galileo's EasyProxy. OpenAthens doesn't really rely fully on IP authentication, but we use IPs for a few things still in the OpenAthens environment. It uses what's called a redirector in some, but not all cases for links. And if you're familiar, not to get too technical here, but if you're familiar with how EasyProxy works, if you want to access, an authenticated resource from offsite, you have to prepend it with a proxy prefix. In the case of OpenAthens, you have to prepend it with an OpenAthens prefix, or what we call that is Athenizing the link. And it redirects very similarly to the way a proxy prefix does, and it just sends you to the local login page. So for example, after we implement Pines libraries, and we're working on implementing Live Oak right now, instead of landing that user at a page where they're seeing unfamiliar login gobbledygook about a password that they may or may not have, if it got to the library in a timely way and was routed appropriately and all the reference staff have it, and you guys do a great job of that, but sometimes it falls through the cracks. Instead of getting hit with that, they're going to be presented with a Pines login screen for a Pines library. So the whole idea here is to make it so that users have to manage fewer logins, and they log in once in one place, and then they get access across the board. True single sign-on is our end goal with OpenAthens. So I just wanted to do a quick terminology run through for you, and I'll be honest and say I won't remember the full thing for what SAML is, for example, myself, but I'll tell you what it is in the context of what you need to know about OpenAthens. So just a general OpenAthens authentication glossary here. You may hear the term federation or federated access floating around. Basically, this means that libraries and vendors have joined together under a federation hat, about the United Federation of Planets, just to be geeky and Star Trekker here. And they agree upon a set of protocols that allow access between those two types of entities. In the case of a library federation, there are things like the OpenAthens Federation. Some of you may have used the In Common Federation. There are a variety of different federations that support authentication in the library world. Single sign-on, and single sign-on, the meaning it can be used a couple of different ways. One way we think of it is using a single set of credentials to access multiple resources. So for example, in order to access Pines and Galileo, ideally you'll use your Pines ID and PIN or password. We also think of it, I only want to log into one thing, and then I want to get access to everything. And OpenAthens facilitates that to a large degree, although we do sometimes, without getting deep into the details, run into hurdles with that we're working to solve. SAML is just basically a standard for single sign-on authentication that OpenAthens uses. So you're going to hear us talk about SAML or SAML metadata sometimes, which is pretty meaningless to us on the library side, but it's just basically the way these systems talk to one another. It's a markup language. You'll hear me say from time to time the three little letters IDP, and this means identity provider. In the case of a lot of our academic libraries, your identity provider would be something like Microsoft Azure Active Directory, or ADFS, or CAS, or other terms that you hear associated with the IDP. But basically, it's the source of data that your institution uses for single sign-on. In the case of our public libraries, we have what's called a connector, and in particular, we have what's called the Pines connector. So essentially, the authentication data that we're using as we go live with Live Oak soon comes from Pines. The Pines team helped us work with OpenAthens to set up a connector so that data that's needed for authentication comes from the Pines catalog and goes into OpenAthens into the vendor to authenticate the user. IP access is something that you'll hear us talk about. That's the magic. You've all seen IP numbers, those little series of numbers that you sometimes send to us here at Galileo and we update for you. IP access means the vendor has your local network IPs so that they know that people should not have to log in or have login access on site or on campus at your institution or in your library. Now, OpenAthens does, as I mentioned, doesn't rely as heavily on IP authentication as other protocols do, like proxy, and we'll talk about that in a bit in a few minutes in the context of OpenAthens statistics. And finally, attribute. And I'm also going to speak just a little bit about privacy as it concerns attributes. So an attribute is something that is in the IDP that describes that user. So within the IDP at an academic institution, you might have data about that student's first name, their last name. You'll pass a unique piece of information that identifies and associates that student with your campus that other systems use to authenticate them. You'll have, in some cases, and this is where we're working to get more attributes, you might have department information. So for example, between the law school at UGA and the main library at UGA, we have a law attribute that lets us route law users properly into law library content. Georgia State passes a lot of different attributes describing their users, including their department and some other associations that help us to do some pretty robust statistics when you look at Georgia State. And we'll see them as an example in a few minutes, but that's what an attribute is. And there are always concerns about privacy and personal information. And we won't dig into this. You may have seen um, the great OpenAthens training earlier today that was done where we talked a little bit about controlling attributes. You don't have to pass any of these attributes to the vendor, but there may be personalization benefits from passing things like the user's email address. Now, vendors don't use those attributes in any kind, and we see to that here at Galileo in any kind of um, uh, bad way. They just use it to create a personalized experience or log students into a platform automatically. For example, all of our libraries that have implemented so far utilize EBSCO SSO, which automatically logs users into their MyEBSCO account so that they don't have to remember separate credentials for that, and they're automatically logged in once they hit an EBSCO resource. So a lot of detail. This is typically what OpenAthens statistics look like. And I pulled this from Georgia State University, but didn't take away any identifying information from the institution. But you see that at the bottom of the page here, the department attributes like history and political science, library research and engagement, gerontology, are coming through for this particular library. So this is Georgia State, and they're passing a lot of different attributes. And you see that I'm looking at the platform info-based publishing, and it's giving me the details about access to info-based publishing from 1 November 2020 to 1 April 2021, and how many accesses are happening by department on a given time frame. I'll talk more about the granularity of these statistics a little bit later, but just wanted to show you basically what the statistics look like if you haven't seen them or used them before. What I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to turn things over to Ken, and I'm going to stop sharing in just a second, Ken. And Ken is just going to do a quick and more in-depth overview and demo of OpenAthens Statistics Live. So Ken, I'm going to go ahead and shut up and turn off my display, and you can go ahead. Thanks, Ken. Welcome, Ken.
All right, thank you.
And we're seeing your screen just great, Ken.
Okay, great. So this is the default landing screen. It's a dashboard that OpenAthens Stats tool gives you. Just gives you a very high level view of some activity, some within 30 days, some in 7 days. And then when you get to the actual data, it is broken out in two different categories. You have accounts and resources. Go through accounts. This is basically going to give you data based on your users and not so much the resources they're accessing. So if you are currently just passing the one attribute over, basically saying this is a valid user, you're not going to see a lot of information about your users here. What you are going to see is the data broken out by account type. And so Russell mentioned, your local directory is called an IDP. And then there's also something called a hosted account from OpenAthens. And this is a lot of institutions are using this for their users that are not actually in their local directory. This could be, alumni or different groups that should have access to a lot of the resources, but are just not in the directory. So you can kind of just see the difference between those two usage broken out by them. And as you can see here, it'd be under account type. And you have glue, this is Georgia State, as Russell mentioned. And then personal accounts. This is the accounts that have been set up in OpenAthens. So if you're not passing a lot of extra attributes, you're really just going to only see at that level. The authentications option is basically just showing you, who has authenticated successfully. You would also be able to see the amount of users that were denied. And so this is representing from the middle of May to the middle of June. So everything's been successful. And then usage. So this is Georgia State. They are currently passing a lot of attributes about their users. So you can actually see usage broken out by department, which is the default here, psychology, history. And if you wanted to compare, usage of certain departments with each other, if you wanted to do psychology versus philosophy, you can look at those two, look at the patterns, those usages. And then you have the option of seeing it in a bar graph versus a line graph over here. And then you also have the option to export or save it. You can view all your save reports in this folder here or view as HTML. But where it gets really good is when you look at resource usage here, because this will allow you to look at specific resources or I should say platforms from vendors, along with what Georgia State has done as our passing college code department and role. So role is going to be, whether it's a faculty member, staff, or student department, your history department, and then college codes, arts and sciences. And so we'll look at college code first. Right now we have all resources selected, which you can go in and search something like EBSCO. And just one drawback to OpenAthens statistics is that it's done at the platform level, unfortunately. So if you have certain specific EBSCO collections you want to look at, they're all going to be combined into the EBSCO host platform. So you're not going to be able to look at specific EBSCO collections, but you can look at the usage of the EBSCO service in general. And here we're doing it by college code. You can also break it down by department. And then also role. So permission set, most of you all, for institutions that have a single campus and they license all the resources are licensed for all users, you're just going to have a single permission set, which will be default. Georgia State's going to be different because they absorbed the Georgia Perimeter campus. And so there are some resources that have been licensed specifically for those campuses. Augusta University is also another institution that would have two different permission sets, but for the most part, all of our institutions just have the default permission set, unless there's some kind of exception that's been added. And then role is the difference between students, staff, faculty. And in this case, they have retirees and just general affiliates that have access to this. And so affiliate and retirees are probably not in the IDP, Georgia State's IDP. So these are probably what we call hosted users. They have been set up in
Right.
the OpenAthens account. And so, like I said, you can save all these reports and you can export them for better use. And Russell, I just want to pass it back to you.
Thanks so much, Ken. And one thing I wanted to point out, and I mentioned attributes and privacy earlier, and you can see it here actively in the in the OpenAthens statistical environment. There is no direct association of the student with these attributes as we've set it up. So there's no way that you can tie this access to an individual student. It's simply using that attribute to produce a statistic when they access the platform. In other words, just the platform access is recorded. It does not record anything once the user is in the platform. It doesn't track what articles they're accessing or anything like that. So again, user privacy is really important to us at Galileo, but also being able to produce this kind of data is key for our end users. I'm going to talk a little bit about that now. Thank you, Ken. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here again and talk about how statistics have been used so far. Again, if you just let me know when you can see my slide deck again.
Looks good. Thanks.
Thank you. So how are they being used? And I reached out to 3 of our institutions that I know have done some activity around the OpenAthens statistics to talk through a little bit with each of them how they are doing this. And just credit as we go through to Laura Bertle and Mick at Georgia State University for helping us as we prepared various aspects of this. We picked their brains a bunch. They are using a lot of attributes and still, I think, crafting unique ways to report out on those. But we specifically picked their brain so much that we didn't want to pick it again. So Georgia State gets great credit for their assistance with us. But just sharing these specific examples here. Georgia Tech, I spoke with Jay Forrest, and Jay let me know that if you want to dig deeper into the work that they are doing at Georgia Tech, do reach out to him. He and I worked together a little bit with, again, Georgia State when Georgia Tech was working to set up some new attributes to kind of find out what their process was. And again, the Georgia State team was very helpful, and we were able to answer some questions and help them to do some things there. But Jay has done a lot of work with this as a data scientist librarian. Basically, they've been looking to assess usage by mapping curriculum to individual colleges and schools. They've done a distribution of use as one of the quantitative data points they use for renewals, sort of weighting the cost and using that to reflect the smaller pool of users and smaller colleges and schools as a way that they kind of offset those smaller colleges and schools and still give them a full say, if you will, in purchasing decisions. And one caveat we do mention, and Ken hinted at the caveat of platform level of statistics. This is the other caveat with OpenAthens statistics is we don't require OpenAthens login for on-campus users. Now, this is an option when we set institutions up. They have the option of going completely IP-less on campus, which means students would log into OpenAthens each time they logged in a public workstation, for example, or each time they accessed in their dorm. Of course, that access lasts for 8 hours, but it is sort of limiting when we do that. And some institutions were very interested in turning off that access because they wanted the full scope of data. For example, Kennesaw State, several of our private institutions wanted to make sure that they captured all that content and all that data. We'll be working back with Georgia State to do that at some point. COVID has gotten in the way of some of those processes. But in any case, their caveat, we don't require users to log in on campus. So that limits the amount of data they get. And it's interesting because in talking with Jay, he was talking about he was really interested in seeing this year's statistics because of all of the off-campus use due to COVID. So it's going to be a more accurate reflection of total access this year than it was last. And he's hoping that that will update their information in interesting ways and give them a better snapshot. Just to show, this is, I didn't go very deep into this, but this is a monthly capture from Georgia Tech that I just wanted to show you. This is their curriculum attribute here. So they have a breakdown by Georgia Tech curriculum that they've put in. And the curriculum attribute is something that they've designed and mapped to their statistics here in OpenAthens. And just Jay shared these charts with us. Basically, this is a distribution of their investment in collection development, and they use OpenAthens statistics to kind of break that down. Their engineering school, their computing school, their sciences, and their usage here. And this is their content spent per FTE student, again, looking at access via OpenAthens here. So again, I will say, if you want to go into greater depth with this, next time I'd love to ask Jay to kind of present this along with us, but just a quick look at some of the work that they've done there at Georgia Tech to break down their spending using those OpenAthens statistics and that curriculum mapping that they've done with an attribute. Next, Georgia Gwinnett College. They're currently in the planning stages with what they're going to do. And thank you, Michelle Colquitt, for sharing your planning documentation with me, and also to Vicki Parsons for being a part of that conversation. They're looking to utilize the reporting functionality to make future collection development decisions, to be able to look at usage monthly, primarily to ensure that their locally purchased electronic resources receive usage. That's another benefit. If you see that something isn't being used, obviously that's an area where you can get them to promote those resources that are lagging in use. And they also wanted to compare OpenAthens usage statistics with Galileo monthly usage statistics and counter reports to create a complete picture of resource usage. And I think that's an interesting way to do it. While you don't get that complete picture with OpenAthens statistics, I think there is some validity, and I'm very curious as to what directions they go in with this at Georgia Gwinnett as they pursue this in terms of comparative statistics between the OpenAthens stats and the other stats that they have. And the summit, they're looking to review and assess their high cost, low access journals and publisher platforms around collection development decisions, but also around promotion and library instruction. And then finally, Deb George at Gwinnett Technical College shared some interesting things that she's doing with this. She shared, we definitely see the effect of instruction classes on resource usage, and she shared the example of Salem Press shows relatively high use because it is another source of master plots content. We all remember using master plots in our English 101 courses to find those literary criticisms that we so desperately needed. So in her case, we direct English 1102 students to master plots for short story and poetry analysis. It's almost every college student here must take that course, including their dual enrollment students. It makes sense to go directly to this content, even though our other databases feature similar articles. The OpenAthens stats confirm heavy use of this particular resource. And then this was a really fun one for me when Deb shared theirs. Hourly analysis is interesting. And I knew it was there, but I've never really thought about it until Deb mentioned it to me. She shared our semester just began May 24th, so most students have not been assigned research papers yet. We see an uptick in Encyclopedia Britannica usage over the last few days. With hourly analysis, we can see that this is the result of preparing a workshop in which we are presenting sources. So you can see your librarian access too, which is sort of fun. If you want to check up on your librarian colleagues and make sure they're doing their prep for instruction, you can go and look and see how much Britannica is. I'm kidding. I don't know. That's not really the use case, but you get the idea. We can plan special reports to track hourly usage during and after student instruction classes to see if students return to some of the same databases we discuss in our workshops. So I captured as part of that. This is the day that Deb mentioned is May 24th. And you see there's a fair amount of up and down usage using the hourly access here. And one thing to point out about this is just something that you can change in that reporting area that Ken shared. And there's a granularity button. You can just change that to hourly, monthly, whatever range you want, and you can manipulate the dates as you need to as well. And then I spoke briefly to John Stevens here at Galileo, and he talked about some of the things that he'd done in the context of the EResources Committee. And some of the questions that we're asking and can use OpenAthens statistics to determine, are there resources to which the majority of USG institutions are already subscribing? So that's one thing John does with the consortial statistics. He looks for opportunities where we might look into, if enough institutions are subscribing on their own, where can we leverage a consortial subscription potentially? Where should we be having those conversations with vendors? Are there additional key resources that support specific academic programs that need to be considered is something else that John is looking at in terms of questions to answer with OpenAthens. So John has also done some looking at things by Galileo resources by subject area, certainly looking at the data on locally purchased resources. Again, we activate all resources, not just Galileo resources for use with OpenAthens. So when we update your locally purchased resources, it gives John a good data stream to see what other resources are being used out there and how they're being used. And that informs and will ultimately help John to do things like map core curriculum, think about things like gateway to completion courses, and perhaps adding some of that content to Galileo subscriptions. So there's lots of ways, I mean, these are longer term things, but ways that John is thinking about using the OpenAthens statistics. So that's, I see that there is something that's popped up in the chat, and oh, Deb's just smiling. Hi, Deb. Thank you. But I do welcome, I'll take a pause, and if there are any questions at this point, feel free to at any time type your questions into the chat. But with that, I'll pause for a minute and turn things back over to Ken to talk a little bit about passing attributes and the work we've been doing with the RACL assessment group. Ken, are you with me?
Yeah, sorry, I
Sorry,
wasn't
that's okay.
giving them a
Give
chance
them a
to
chance.
questions. Yeah. Well, I'll just start, and if anybody has any questions, feel free to either raise your hand or type something in the chat, and we'll get to you.
Yeah.
Um,
And Ken, I'll just advance the slides for you.
okay. Yeah. Great. Thanks. So this slide here is talking about the document that was developed under the RACL Assessment Working Group. I guess our goal is to help libraries to communicate to their IT department on trying to get more attributes passed to OpenAthens so they can get better usage data on their resources. In the PowerPoint, if you come to this later after the presentation, the second bullet is an actual link to the document. In the next two slides, I'll actually go over the text in the document. But we do, go over the basic attributes that we kind of have recommended, which are 3. And then we address some privacy concerns and then next steps for libraries. All right, next slide. And so this is the actual text of the document. It's half of it. For some libraries working with their ID to pass attributes from the local directory isn't really a difficult thing because they already have a very well-established working relationship with their IT. But for other libraries, this might be a little more challenging. They might not have a great connection with their IT department, and so asking them to pass some attributes about users to a third-party vendor that they have never heard of might be challenging. So to help the libraries, we've developed this document to basically make a short and direct document to basically, wanted to touch on all the potential questions that IT might have, but not give too much information where they just kind of glaze over it and maybe even ignore it. So the first 3 bullets are the actual attributes that we're recommending: role, which is student, faculty, or staff, in that order; department or college code, which I've mentioned, I guess, in the stats tool demo. Not all 3 have to be passed, and it's not even limited to just these 3 if you wanted to pass more. But these are the ones that we've kind of recommended that would give best data analysis. So will these attributes be sent to third-party vendors, service providers? And the answer is no. That is definitely going to be a major concern for IT. So the attributes being passed to OpenAthens are not passed to service providers, although it is an option to do that if the service provider requires it, or if it enhances the user experience with the platform for the service provider, which might be something like a personal folder. But we would never configure that without the permission of the institution. And the next slide. And so, we've pretty much talked about what the institution would gain in terms of viewing their usage data. And here we've just kind of outlined it in a very high level. And then it ends with basically the next step. So if you have gotten a commitment from your IT department, if they would work on this, you can simply contact Galileo, and Galileo will arrange a online meeting with EBSCO support, and it usually takes from 30 to 45 minutes to get this all set up. It just depends on, I guess, maybe their comfortability with setting up something like this. But it is a very simple process overall. And so, like I said, there's a link to the actual document, and if you want to get started with this, you can just contact us, and we will facilitate that conversation.
Yep, thank you, Ken. And just a couple things related to that. As talking with, and we had a great source conversation about this with Laura and Nick at Georgia State. And essentially, where the process starts is getting the attributes are there, but the attributes are generally going to be in Banner or the student information system side. So there's some potential development and communication that has to happen between IT and the department that controls the student information system in order to extract those additional attributes. Generally, this is something that's understood. I've talked with one of the great things about this implementation is we've really developed a closer connection with IT departments and conversations that we've had with them through this implementation process. And I think they have a first wave of understanding of what this means and what we can do with this. And this is why I think this is timely, and why Ken and the Rackle team have been working on this now, is because we want to be able to give libraries who are using OpenAthens and have been using it for a while a cornerstone for conversation with your IT department about taking some initiatives to get new attributes moving forward. So credit to Ken for his work on this. He did a great job of bringing this together. And again, the link to the document is provided, and we'll be sharing this document more formally soon as well via the Galileo website or FAQs. And I believe it's on the Galileo documentation page, right, Ken?
That is right, yeah.
And with that in mind, I want to open the floor for any questions that you all have. If you'd like to take a second, I can share the document, but basically Ken shared the core points of it. Again, I want to take a second to offer some thank yous to Michelle Colquitt at Georgia Gwinnett, Jay Forrest at Georgia Tech, Deb George at Gwinnett Tech, John Stevens here at Galileo, and of course, the Rackle Assessment Working Group, and Sonia Gaither chairs that hardworking group. She's at Clayton State and does a great job with that. So we're thrilled to be able to have these conversations with you, with IT. If at any point you want to talk through aspects of this with us as you prepare to talk with your IT team about doing more with attributes, let us know. We're happy to set up a conversation and talk through various aspects of this process with you. But with that in mind, again, the floor is open for any questions that you have. And I want to, again, thank everyone for attention and attendance today. And we look forward to answering any questions. Seeing no questions, we'll leave it open for a minute and see if anyone chimes in. Jessica shares, I made some help convincing my IT department. I tried to ask for an alumni. We just talked about, I remember we just had this conversation and they didn't want to do that. Right, and Jessica, that's one of those situations. Actually, thank you for sharing that experience from BSU. I'm actually behind the scenes here making some plans around that on your behalf, Jessica. I want to talk about elevating that conversation and keeping it going. So just note that I have taken some attention to that and will be looking at that specific situation in greater depth on the Galileo side. Bob Krugmel asked, the stats are for sessions only. So it is accesses, truly. It's when someone logs in. And you'll also have noticed if someone, it also has an element where it does identify unique users. So if someone's cookie expires, they've been doing research for 8 hours and access in the same time frame, it accounts for that as well. But yes, it's generally accesses to a platform for a session. Great questions. Other questions? Also, I welcome, again, I know there are a lot of folks who are on OpenAthens, and I see Bob, I'm hoping that we did a lot of setting up to make sure that Bob could get good data at CTS, not to call you out, Bob, for for your alumni users, which I think is a really great use case that you all have there. And I'm hoping that data is something that's helpful to see in the statistics, and Ken did a lot of good work on that. But other use cases that you all have or wanted to share, that's welcome here too, because there's always unique needs in institutions. And this is another part about attributes as well. Another thing that they can help us to do is, you may have seen in the other session today, there was some discussion around permission sets. If we have attributes, we can also do some access control too. And this can lead to long-term savings with collection development. We've done this with Bernal, for example. Bernal has a couple of resources. They wanted to limit access to just a couple of departments. And that's something else that attributes can help libraries to do. And we're starting to realize cost savings from that. I'm only offering access to students and X department to this resource that it would otherwise, I would have to license for the entire FTE of my institutions, there can be some savings realized with that as well. So that's another angle with this to keep in mind. All right. Well, again, thank you all so much. This is a fairly brief session today, and we welcome any follow-up questions after the fact. But thanks again, Ken, and thanks to all of you for, again, your attention and your attendance. And I hope you enjoyed the conference this week and got a lot out of it.
Thanks, everybody. I appreciate it.